AI in itself is a tool and not a right. It's not an end in itself. It's a tool for something else. So rather than scaling it and spreading it like a plug and play tool with potentially really bad consequences, I would plea for more careful regulation, at least in sensitive contexts.
Hello, and welcome to a whole new episode of Engati CX. I'm your host, Kimberly, and today we have a technology expert with us on the show. But before I introduce you to our very special guest, allow me to introduce you to the magic of Engati. Engati is the world's leading multilingual no-code digital CX platform available across 14 channels with 45,000 solutions created across 187 countries in every domain and use case. Engati has also been recognized as a top platform by Inc.com, TechWorld, CIO, and many others. We run the Engati blog, video channel, and the Engati CX podcast, receiving upward of 400,000 visitors annually. And now for our guest. Dr. Dorothea Baur is the owner of the Baur Consulting AG, where she advises companies, non-profit organizations, and foundations on ethics, responsibility, and sustainability with a focus and responsibility for finance, tech, and data privacy. She identifies opportunities and risks at the interface between businesses, technologies, and society, and the environment while developing innovative strategies and effective approach to the ethical questions. Hi, Dorothea. Welcome to the show. We are so pleased to talk to you today.
Hi, Kimberly. Thanks a lot for having me.
But before we dive into our interview with Dorothea, don't forget to subscribe to Engati and tap the bell icon to get access to exclusive content coming from thought leaders around the globe. So Dorothea, let's get started with our questions. We have a bunch of exciting stuff that we're going to talk today about. So tell me, according to you, do machines have an effect on our behaviors, thinking, and our interactions? How do we stay in control of these complex intelligent systems?
Well, yes, they certainly do have an effect on all these dimensions, on our behaviors, thinking, and interactions. But I must emphasize that, a psychologist could describe you in detail how this effectively impacts our behavior. But I'm an ethicist, and what differentiates me from a psychologist is that I'm not focusing on how it is, but more on how it should be. So what I'm describing here is like from an ethical perspective on how on the value side of these impacts. So yes, machines can connect people, as in digital communication. Most evidently here, you're sitting in Mumbai, I'm sitting in the Swiss Alps. That's just marvelous. So they do affect our interactions, and the fact that we're even seeing each other is just wonderful. And I'd say at the same time, they can also create a distance between people. So in general, machines seem more objective than people. They seem more rational and more scientific. So we might trust machines more than people when we kind of communicate with them. But this is dangerous because, as we know from artificial intelligence specifically, behind every machine, there are the people that create it, that select the data, that trains the algorithms, and that bring in their own biases and worldviews. They don't need to be evil, but they are there. They're not like scientific objective necessarily. So it's just a pseudo objectivity. So however, when we get used to interacting with machines, this might lower our tolerance for real human behavior that can be pretty messy and unpredictable at times. And this might then negatively affect our social skills. So that much about the impact on our behavior, and about how we can stay in control, or whether we can stay in control. We cannot stay in control of these systems directly if we are not the ones who program them. But as users, we can make sure to keep a critical distance, or rather to critically reflect on where we want to assign machines importance in our everyday lives and where not. So what is something that I gladly delegate to machines? For example, using navigation systems. I'm happy to use a GPS and not have to read map on paper while driving. It's making me a much safer driver if I'm not reading a map while driving. But I must be aware, if I do that, that this might mean that I lose the skills to orient myself if the GPS fails. So I am really willing to take that risk into account, because on balance, I think I win more by using GPS than I lose. And so that's okay for me. But let's say another example, and I'm taking crazy examples here. Do I want a software to analyze, let's say, my partner's emotions and give me advice about what he or she might need? So there is this whole emotion recognition debate, and we know it's mostly pseudoscience and it's very kind of controversial. But if we start using machines or AI to intermediate between real humans, we really deprive ourselves and our partners of the genuine human quality interaction. So these are just like two different examples.
Well, I completely agree with what you said, as you were saying that, behind every machine, behind every algorithm that's formed, there's eventually a human sitting behind. So indirectly, it's kind of, the way humans see the situation there.
Exactly.
So what do you think, Dorothea? Will AI contribute to the rise of misinformation and fake media? Or do you think it can be used to control the spreading of misinformation?
Well, the truth is AI can be used for both. So that's a real challenge, that many of AI's ethical problems are not inherent in the technology as such, but they depend on how, where, and by whom it is used. So artificial intelligence can be used to filter out hate speech, for example, and to relieve people from doing the terrible job of content moderation. We have read reports about people doing content moderation. They have to watch like the most atrocious videos and, are really traumatized. So in that case, it's really helpful if this can be done by AI, and it's not entirely successful yet, as we also experience on a daily level, but it's at least a start. But at the same time, artificial intelligence is also, of course, behind all the bots and many other tools that spread misinformation, that create deep fakes, very dangerous phenomenon, and that generally undermine our trust. So wherever artificial intelligence is used, we need to be very clear that it is only at best a technological fix for symptoms. So artificial intelligence cannot resolve underlying structural problems. That is, if we live in a divided society, we need to tackle the underlying economic, social, political causes. Artificial intelligence cannot solve these. It can at best mitigate them, but it can also distract from them. So we must be very careful not to take artificial intelligence as an excuse from accepting our own responsibility. It doesn't make us better humans. We need to become better humans ourselves.
Correct. I completely agree with you. Since you were talking about chatbots, so we at Engati, so when the lockdown started, we came across this COVID bot. So this kind of helped at a wider scale, because we had the system talk about the symptoms and what you can do if you think that you might have the symptoms, the latest news, you have the live counter, you have many other channels, and different kind of stuff that, so we kind of set like an authoritative entity so that the audience can actually benefit from them. So I think that is one thing where we kind of are successful, and we're kind of helping AI be like a pioneering thing to the audience and not have like a very negative thing about it.
Yes.
Because actually in this current situation, everyone is going to believe anything under the sun because of fear and panic.
Yes.
So it's very important that, we come across like a system where you can actually differentiate. What do you think?
No, this is really important, especially, now in a time of a specific crisis that we have never seen before as a global community, and where it's really about life and death. It's really important to see how artificial intelligence can provide some kind of orientation. And that's how you described how you use it, that chatbot about COVID symptoms. If it is, applied to a clear domain where it's like where it cannot be misused or hijacked to then suddenly spread racist or panic creating messages or whatever bad things you could think of. That's like one of the really good things about AI, because also chatbots are more accessible to a lot of people who are not as literate. They might rather chat than write and Google. So it clearly kind of enables access to information for people that otherwise would be, more dependent on random street propaganda that just come by. So it's all about how you design it and where you apply it, deploy it responsibly.
Correct.
Yes.
So now, since we are talking about what you can say, forced digital transformation, now everyone is just going digital just because of the outbreak. So what do you think is the downside of this forced digital transformation due to the COVID outbreak?
Well, I think one of the key problems is mental health. So as evident by the isolation and alienation many people feel. I mean, we often read how technology in general, but also or how technology in general can connect people, as evident in this interaction, and that it can basically simulate or substitute real social interaction, but that's not really the case, as we realize now. So a lot of people suffer in their endless Zoom calls because there's also no room for spontaneity, let alone serendipity. We can only see and hear people, but other senses like smell and touch that are vital to our perception as humans are missing. And it's a reduced and impoverished way of social interaction, but of course it's still better than nothing. And another problem on a more like societal level, not on an individual level, or like also on an individual level, but a societal problem is, depending on where you live, the digital transformation can emphasize or exacerbate economic differences, because not everyone has the same access to technological resources, and not everyone has the same skills. And it's very clear that for this, for example, especially affects school kids. We know that kids from wealthy or like high skilled backgrounds suffer significantly less from distant learning, while those from less privileged backgrounds really struggle to keep up. So the gap between the privileged kids and the less privileged kids really widens during this time, and this can have long-term consequences for a generation of kids in how they qualify for the labor market, and etc., how they generally, that the opportunities that they have in life. So depending on how much longer this continues, this is really a problem. And also finally, digital transformation is a nice thing if you live in a beautiful house with plenty of space, but it's an absolute nightmare when you're locked in a tiny apartment with many people around you, no privacy, and like noisy surroundings, etc. So it's not an equalizer. Digital transformation doesn't it's not egalitarian. It can very much exacerbate differences.
Well, that is something that I, on a personal level, didn't think of. Thank you so much for, just kind of throwing light there. We spoke about, having access to technologies. Okay. So I want to know about, with algorithms and machine learning models becoming more open source, almost everyone can have access to these machines and algorithms. So while we are in the emergence or a lot of systems being used for good, there's like a potential that it can be used dangerously as well. So how can we prevent this? And do you believe there should be like a limit or a cap as to who can have access to these technologies?
Well, yeah, I know. There is this fancy talk about democratizing artificial intelligence. And, I'm originally, way back, I'm a political scientist by training. And I just, I hate using the term democracy in that context. But what they mean when they talk about democratizing AI is make AI accessible to everyone, which seems a good thing, but it's a misuse of the term democracy, because democracy means much more, or something very different from just having access to a random commercial product. So plus, artificial intelligence is not something like, for example, health. Yes, you want to democratize healthcare. Everyone should have access to it. And maybe AI can enhance access to healthcare. Or you want to democratize education. Everyone should have access to education. And AI might help with that. So, but AI in itself is a tool and not a right. It's not an end in itself. It's a tool for something else. So rather than scaling it and spreading it like a plug and play tool with potentially really bad consequences, I would plea for more careful regulation, at least in sensitive contexts, like in contexts where artificial intelligence impacts on the rights of other people. So in finance, in the court system, in healthcare, in employment, education, etc. There are plenty of such sensitive contexts. So if you introduce standards for certifying AI, which also include accountability questions, like some kind of audit systems for artificial intelligence, you don't necessarily focus on who can have access to it, because that's kind of like if you focus on the who, you really risk to discriminate, but you focus on what the technology needs to fulfill in order to be released to a wider public. So, but of course, that's a bit naive, all of this talk, because we're living in a globalized world with very different regulatory regimes and very different cultural approaches to human rights and privacy and surveillance. So it's very hard to find a common denominator. And digital technology, as we know, is not bound to countries, so it can always be shifted to places with lower standards. But in principle, I would say, make it accessible if it is necessary as a tool to reach a higher goal, or like to secure rights. But don't just make it accessible for the sake of being accessible, and don't talk about democratizing it, please. It's just plain wrong, in my opinion.
Yes, I completely agree with you. I think I like the part where you said, let's not focus on who and let's focus on what needs to be done. It's something where I don't want to keep for myself. It's really an eye-opener to me. So is there anything else you would like to leave our audience with?
Well, not for the moment, other than, I'm just amazed that I had the opportunity to talk to you, that you reached out with Engati. First time I talked to a chatbot company, like a really fascinating phenomenon, and also something that, inspires me to reflect more deeply, because I'm not a person that usually uses chatbots, because I'm very literate and I'm fast with typing. But I realized that I'm totally, I'm not representative, and it's really good to be exposed also to other contexts where people have another approach to technology and have other needs. So this is kind of, having such conversations is also really widening my horizons. So I'm really grateful for you to reach out to me and giving me that chance. So thanks a lot for that, Kimberly.
Thank you so much, Dorothea, for giving us your time. Your insights were really valuable, and I know our audience is going to enjoy this interview as much as I did. And I just want to thank you for just coming over to the show and talking to us and sharing with us the small things that we might have missed when we talk about big things. There are these small things where you need to keep in mind. Thank you for showing us that. And this interview was definitely an eye-opener. Thank you so much.
Thank you. Likewise.
We will be back with a whole new episode with another expert soon. Stay tuned, and we'll see around you for the next one.